and welcome to What It Takes, where our goal is to discuss education, community, health, and opportunity with decision makers and people working to make our region and world a better place. I'm Tom Landon. You know, we often talk about the importance of highlighting the region's outdoor and recreational activities in order to attract companies and workers and to improve the health and well-being of our fellow citizens. Today, we turn our attention to the water and specifically to the announcement of a new in-river kayak park to be located in Roanoke. My guests today are in many ways the tip of the spear when it comes to this subject. Pete Eshelman is the Director of Outdoor Branding for the Roanoke Regional Partnership, and many know him as the founder of the wildly popular Go Fest held each fall in Roanoke. We're also joined by Michael Clark, Director of Parks and Recreation for the City of Roanoke. Michael is an experienced Parks and Rec Director with a demonstrated history of success in working with the public sector, which I imagine is one of the most important skills a person in his position can have when it comes to balancing the many demands placed on our public parks. Gentlemen, when the new kayak park was announced, I watched with interest on social media as Pete was bombarded with questions and concerns, and I hope today's show will help answer them for our viewers. So welcome to the show. Thank you for taking the time to spend.
Thanks for having us. Thank you.
Before we talk specifically about the kayak park, which I'm very excited about as somebody who does like to paddle, let's just get to know you guys a little bit. So Michael, Director of Parks and Rec for a mid-sized American city. How did you end up where you are, and what is it you like about what you do?
Well, it's interesting because in college I didn't study to be in the Parks and Recreation field. I got a part-time job while studying at Virginia Tech with the local Parks and Recreation department, and immediately fell in love with the work. And as luck would have it, right around the time I graduated, a full-time position came open. Was fortunate to get that position and kind of backed my way into the field that way. I did go back to get a master's in recreation, parks, and sport management, but worked in Montgomery County for several years. Came to Roanoke in 2007 as the recreation superintendent, and slowly worked my way up through the department. Became director in December of 2016.
That's great. And Pete, you and I have known each other for a while now. You've sort of helped to create this idea of Roanoke as an outdoor town. How did you get to where you are?
Like Michael, I too did not study this in college. I actually studied sociology, so I studied people.
It's a good major.
So kind of segues into it a little bit, but my dad always told me to follow my passion, and my passion has been the outdoors and sharing that with as many people as possible. So I came to Southwest Virginia during my summers in college and worked at a place called Wilderness Adventure at Eagle Landing, not too far from here. Spent a lot of time there growing that program, and then I had this unique opportunity to work with the Roanoke Regional Partnership, which is the regional economic development organization for about 8 local governments kind of throughout this area. And I was basically given a 2-sentence job description and a pat on the back to basically leverage the beauty of where we live, the mountains, the lakes, the rivers, and the trails, to attract business investment and attract talent to the area. And over time, in order for that to be sustainable, we had to have the buy-in from our community. And so a lot of our focus has been educating our residents on everything that's right here in our backyard and what it means to be kind of an outdoor-driven economy.
And I know, early in my career, I did some work with the partnership, some video work, and I don't recall at the time, this was in the mid-'80s, I don't think most communities, and certainly not Roanoke, were talking about how the natural world impacts the economy and everything else.
Well, you're spot on. And I think we were one of the first definitely regional economic development organizations to approach developing the outdoors as an economic sector. Since then, lots of states have created state offices of outdoor recreation. But I always say that, we treated the beauty of where we live like wallpaper. It's nice to look at, but that's where it ended. And what we're talking about today is an example of when we're intentional with it, when we invest in it, when we curate these outdoor assets, what can happen when we do that.
Right, and for Michael, I know people think of Parks and Rec, it's like, oh, who's running the sports teams and keeping the city pool open, or cutting the grass. I'm sure grass cutting is a very important part of what.
Absolutely.
But at what point did you start noticing that, oh, you weren't just this department that was taking care of our parks, you were an important part of the local economy and how people perceive the community?
Well, we've always played a role in kind of the region's tourism efforts, but had never really focused in on economic development. It's like, what can we contribute to the long game. We were always after those short bursts of infusion. You know, when people come and visit the area and they spend their money in restaurants and hotels and such, and which is great for the Valley and for any community organization. But it wasn't until we were approached by Pete and the Roanoke Regional Partnership and start talking about, well, what can we do for the long game? What can we do to get not just businesses but families to relocate here and to choose Roanoke and the Roanoke Valley as their home? Often refer to Parks and Recreation Department as a multi-tool, because we're so much more than just sports and cutting grass, but we play a broader role in community development and making a community more livable.
And go ahead, Pete.
No, I was saying, so many times, people think of parks and the beauty where we live as a afterthought or a secondary when you're talking about economic development. And I think what we've been able to realize is that this is something that needs to be at the forefront when we're meeting and discussing, this with potential companies or people that are considering moving here. And communities across the globe recognize that now, at least the ones that are being proactive. And that's what we are as a region. We're being proactive. And we recognize that these parks and open space, they're important, and they're really critical in differentiating our community from other communities.
Before we talk about this kayak park specifically, I want everybody to think back, those of us who've been around a while, to before we had a greenway. And in Roanoke, those of you watching from outside our city limits and are outside the county and the general region, the Roanoke River was really not an amenity when I moved here. Do you think the presence of the greenway really changed that at all?
Absolutely. You see the growth of greenways throughout the valley, and that all stemmed from that initial push, back in the late 90s to get the Roanoke River Greenway established and started building. I'll share a quick story with you. Pete and I were invited by the National Recreation and Park Association to go out to Oklahoma City for a mini summit on economic development and to share our story here. And one of the stories they shared from Oklahoma City was back in the late 80s, United Airlines was looking to get a new hub. And they had narrowed it down to a couple cities. Oklahoma City was one. And they sent in some mid-level executives to live in Oklahoma City and to report back and just say, tell us what you think about it. Well, they came back and said, this place sucks. We don't want to be here because there's nothing to do. So they ended up choosing Indianapolis instead. And as a result of that, Oklahoma City made this major investment in their recreation and cultural amenities. They raised the sales tax and used money from the sales tax to build a whitewater kayak park, to build a brand new skate park, to build a canal through the city that you could float from different businesses and restaurants and such. This big cultural entertainment district to try to attract businesses. So that type of investment dates back quite a bit, but it's been so long that people have really brought it to the forefront and shown the importance of recreation and cultural amenities in terms of economic development.
Well, for so long, rivers, cities grew up by rivers because that's where you could have a factory and use it for power and for waste and whatever else it might be.
Well, I think we're just really lucky to have a river running through our urban corridor. Not every city does, but like you said, I think it took the greenways to bring our attention to the river. Everything has been built facing away from the river, nothing is toward it. A lot of that's because of the flooding. The flood reduction plans have changed that. But the greenways, people have now see it and they're seeing the river and they're like, I want to know how to get in there. I want to know how to interact with it. And there's been a lot of movement on that front to build access points so people can get in and out of the river. And this is just another thing that we're doing to kind of embrace people with that river. I mean, probably 5 years ago, you wouldn't see very many people on the river, floating through Roanoke.
No, that's definitely true. I mean, we bought a canoe when we were newlyweds a long time ago, and we floated the Roanoke River, and I don't think people would come out and say, what are you doing? And you had to figure out your own place to put in, your own place to take out.
And I think that's part of our job is how do we make it more accessible? How do we make it more user-friendly? And now we're seeing more and more people get in it, tubing, fishing, kayaking, stand-up paddleboarding. So I think it's only logical that we continue to look at how we enhance the river experience for people. I'm a big believer in conservation through recreation. People always say, hey, the river's dirty, I'm not getting in that river. I was like, just about every urban waterway is impaired in some shape or form because of the stormwater runoff, but through conservation, through recreation, people take care of what they care about. And so the more people we can get engaged with our waterways, the more they're going to care about seeing the health of those waterways improve. And believe it or not, things like this actually help with that.
Yeah, so, okay, let's talk about Kayak Park. First of all, we could talk forever about how you got the idea or anything else, and we will touch on that a little bit. What is one? You know, what is it? I know what a bike track is, or that, but what's a kayak park?
Well, let me start by saying
what is this kayak?
There are kind of two different types.
Yeah,
okay,
sure.
So there is a, for lack of a better word, external, fully enclosed concrete channel type whitewater park. There's one in Charlotte that mimics the features you would find in a natural river. It either pulls water in from a major water source, or they operate it like a swimming pool. The other kind are in-river parks that use a natural riverbed, but just manipulate the flow in the stream by either adding material in it, large rocks, boulders, those type of things. In some cases, dredging around if you can go down some to move the existing material around to create riffles and rapids and different types of flow that cater to different types of activities. Does that sum it up?
Pretty good. I mean, that's just it. We're building a park within the banks of the river. So as Michael said, they'll come in and they'll, you have an area where the river's wide, and you have a bunch of choices to float through, but they're all very shallow, so you're scraping. What this will do is it'll constrict it into one channel, so it'll be a one deeper channel, which makes it easier to pass at low water levels. And then these different features, they'll come in, they're designed to look, well, they are natural rock, but they're designed to look natural like they're there. And at different water levels, they're designed so at low water level, this thing and this thing might become something of play for being in the river. And as the water level rises, those will change. And so it's really just designed to create this unique experience for kayakers, tubers, fishermen, stand-up paddle boards, or even surfers can enjoy it as well.
Yeah, somebody told me when I mentioned I was going to have this topic, they said, it's kind of like just building a playground in the water.
Right.
Yeah.
Right? But in terms of it attracting anyone, what is it about this particular spot? And first of all, where's this going to be? And we'll talk about how you pick that site, but where will it be? Because I know people are curious about that.
Sure. This is going to be in the Wasena Park area within the city of Roanoke. And for people that are familiar with the park, there is a pedestrian bridge that connects Wasena Park with Vic Thomas Park, so very close to the Black Dog Salvage. If you cross that pedestrian bridge, you will see existing kind of rapids on both the upside and the downside of that bridge. That's one area that's going to be enhanced, and then the other area is closer to the river house, so a little further downstream. There's actually the greenway crosses, as well as Wiley Drive, where vehicles can cross one directional, right there where the river house is, and the Wasena Tap Room, and Roanoke Mountain Adventures. If you go there, look, you'll see additional kind of a little bit of a ripple and rapids right there, and that's where the additional place will be designed as well.
So it's not just going to be one sort of surfing spot, as we like to say, or it's going to be multiple.
Yeah, there'll be one main spot that will probably attract the most people, but there will be other spots further down the river for folks to take advantage of. And it really just depends on the terrain at that particular location, the depth of the current riverbed, the flow that's coming through there, what we can manipulate, what we can't. But I would say that probably the area above the pedestrian bridge going to Vic Thomas Park will probably be the most popular spot.
Yeah.
So I imagine as Director of Parks and Rec, a lot of needs, a lot of things you have to do on an annual basis. How did this idea kind of rise to the top of, or near the top of your list of like, this is something we're actually going to do?
Sure. So, back in 2015, Pete and his organization initiated a feasibility study for an in-river park. A handful of locations throughout the valley were identified. First was just saying, do we have the water flow anywhere to be able to do something like this? And fortunately, Wasena was one of those projects, or locations rather. In terms of rising to a level of importance, during the pandemic, our parks just got bombarded with folks looking for just any type of release from being indoors, looking for not just physical activity, but just a respite mentally, emotionally. And in some cases, our park saw visitation in excess of 300%. The river was not immune to that. A lot of folks took to the river, and we saw more folks paddling. So when the city was awarded the money through the American Rescue Plan Act from the pandemic, start looking at a group of projects that we can invest in the community, in the social infrastructure, if you will, that will benefit from the pandemic. This was one of the projects that came up. So this is an excellent way to use that money to reinvest in our recreational amenities. So fortunately, Pete and his group had laid the foundation for it several years ago, kept the idea floating, no pun intended, or intended, yeah, to make sure it stayed on the forefront. And when the opportunity was right, it became a viable project, and we're very fortunate that it was selected.
And you've touched on where the money was going. We are at this point where there is, because of rescue money, other incentives the community's got. I think there is right now like this kind of golden moment to do big projects that might have languished for a long time. I think another one is the skate park. I don't know how that funding is happening, but I know that project sort of got a jump start because of all of a sudden we can do some things that we couldn't have before. Some of the questions, kind of rapid fire here. Just some of the questions that came up when this was first announced. People want to know, how did you pick the site? Why not at Explore Park?
Sure. So Explore Park actually is identified as part of our feasibility study. And so Explore Park, part of the master plan for Explore Park, does include an in-river kayak park. So down the road, very well may happen. That's up to Roanoke County to decide how they allocate their funds to do that. Roanoke City decided to use some of their funds to build this. So I view this as phase 1, with phase 2 being with an Explore Park soon after, is my hope.
Great. It also helps, we talked a little bit about the land ownership, right?
Yeah.
Is that one of the things that made Wasena a more viable and kind of better choice?
Yes, yeah, on just about both sides of the river, except for the lowest spot that we're looking at, both sides are publicly owned. With the exception of just below the second low water bridge, where there is some private land ownership on one side of the river, just Wasena was an ideal spot.
So limits the amount of condemnation or trespassing.
You can't just put one of these anywhere you want. You have to have a certain amount of gradient, a certain amount of drop and flow. So if you have an area with the river where it's very calm water, you can't do one.
Right.
So that kind of determines a certain places that are eligible to do it in the first place.
All right. One question that some people ask that I admit I kind of rolled my eyes at, but everybody's got their own thing that they're most concerned about. But it's like, why are we doing this? This is going to benefit a very small group of people. Mm-hmm. How does this benefit more than a very small, people like me who have kayaks who love to kayak?
Sure. Let me take it.
Well, I think Pete touched on it earlier. We're about providing access, and amenities like this make the river more accessible, because what we're building is not just the in-river park. We're building the support amenities around it too. So better put-ins, better takeouts, more accessible parking. These are the type of things that will introduce folks to new and different types of activities in the river. So it's not just a small select group of folks. And I challenge anyone that's ever been out to the Roanoke River on a nice Saturday. I mean, you see all walks of life through Wasena. You see folks paddling, you see folks swimming, you see people taking their chairs out and just sitting in the middle of the river, just sitting and talking. So that's a recreational activity for people of all ages and abilities, regardless of where you come from.
Well, and also, God love the people who are play softball or tennis or whatever. I don't use those facilities, so here's one that I get to use. In terms of the economic part of this, I know in a lot of your materials you talk about the demographics and how this is a really good way to help introduce people to Roanoke. Is there anything that you know about kayakers in general or paddlers in general, and why they're an attractive group of people that we would want to?
I think it's more that I think our focus is on building a better community for our residents first, and then if we do that well, then we're creating a place where businesses want to be, where people want to live, and where people want to visit as well. And yes, there's been, property values along the greenways and river amenities like this, those increase. Will people come to visit us just because of this kayak park? That's to be determined, but it will enhance their experience. And I think that's really what we're looking for. I always say the outdoors here is diverse with easy access, whether it's trails or rivers or lakes. And this is just another way that we can enhance that experience, again, for our residents first.
What kind of maintenance is it going to require? When you're putting rocks, I know you're doing more than this, but you're building this facility in the river. What happens in a big flood? Is this going to be a continuing expense for taxpayers?
I don't expect it to be, not the in-river part. The way it'll be constructed will be, it won't get damaged with certain flows of water. As the water goes up, it'll just go right over top of it. It'll be built to mimic what should be there naturally anyway. And we're not doing hardly any maintenance in the river now. Where we may see some uptick is on the banks. Obviously with the more use that comes in, the more people will bring their trash and more general wear and tear. So, we do expect maybe an uptick at put-ins and takeouts and those type of things, but I don't expect any significant maintenance with the actual in-river park.
How does it fit with things like the low water bridge on the lower part of Wasina where it collects trash and it always floods, and is any of that connected to any of this?
So there's what's called the Roanoke Blueway Initiative as a committee that's focused on, again, where do we need access points, where do we need signage, where do you think, and that's been identified, that this bridge is something that needs to be taken care of. There's definitely conversations taking place about what that would look like, because we recognize, and so in my mind, that's the next step. That's the next thing that we have to happen. All of this is above that. So we can fast forward to when that has been removed and people can pass under that without getting out and debris is not collecting, then that just continues to enhance that river experience for people, and they can continue floating on down the river.
And hopefully the more people use the river, the more people are going to advocate for a cleaner river. And does the Roanoke River's been identified as a ecologically sensitive area? You got the Roanoke River log perch, right? Right?
Yep.
Right. How will the construction of this impact the environment?
So we're going to go through this in a very environmentally sensitive way. We'll be working with federal Fish and Wildlife on this, as well as the state wildlife resources, to make sure we don't impair the waterway anymore for the log perch. And I know that there are certain times of the year that you can't do any work in the river because of the log perch. So permitting for this is going to be pretty extensive. We'll be
the building is the easy part.
Oh yeah,
that's the easy, fast part, is the actual building. It's getting through all the permits in order to be able to get to where you can actually start building it.
So between the Army Corps of Engineers and FEMA and Federal Fish and Wildlife, DWR, DEQ, possibly EPA, the whole alphabet of federal, state agencies, and then certain amount of local ordinances as well. We'll be in permitting for a while on this.
But it's interesting. We've done some walkthroughs with some consultants, just kind of getting their feel for it, and they pointed out to us as we were walking down the stream bed a lot of the sediment buildup that's in the river, and that's not good. That's actually not good for the health of the aquatic life, the Roanoke log perch, any species in there. What this will actually do, by concentrating the flow, it actually flushes that sediment on downstream. So that's just one of the different ways that it's going to improve the health of the river.
I think I know the answer to this. Does it impact fishermen? Is this going to be positive, negative? Are there things like tubers still going to be able to use the river?
Well, I think that sediment flushing out.
A dangerous spot for like a lowhead dam would?
No, that flushing of the sediment out is good for the health of the fishery. The turbulation or the oxygenation from the rapids oxygenates the water more so, which is good for the fish as well. And again, we use the term in-river kayak park. I actually am trying to get away from the kayak park and just saying in-river park, because again, people can sunbathe on the rocks that are put in there. It's good for tubers, it's good for fishermen, it's good for kayakers. It's really just good for anybody that likes to be in the water.
Well, and as anybody's been to like McCoy Falls near Blacksburg, any hot summer day, people hanging out just on the rocks. It's just a place to hang out. I'm curious, we're down to the last couple minutes, so when it's done, are you guys really looking forward to, I know you've got artist renditions and scientists telling you what it's going to look like, but can you imagine that moment when you get the right water flow and you see some of these features really do what they're supposed to do?
Yeah, no, I'm super excited to see what it's going to look like. I wasn't working with the city when we did the flood reduction project, but just watching what that work did to the river as we were widening it, and now we're going back in to kind of concentrate that flow some. Really anxious to see how it's going to turn out.
All right. Well, we're sadly, there we go. That's our time for today. So, as a recreational paddler, I admit that I'm very excited to watch the new kayak park come into being. I'm probably not impartial here. I would like to thank my guests, Pete Eshelman and Michael Clark, for taking time out of their busy schedules. To learn more about this kayak park, please visit RoanokeOutside.com. And finally, this reminder that all of the episodes of What It Takes can be seen on demand on our Echo channel at blueridgepbs.org/echo. I hope you'll go there and subscribe and contact us if you've got an idea for a future conversation. For What It Takes, I'm Tom Landon.